Bang, bang, bang. The sound of someone trying to break down my door at 6:30 a.m. on a Saturday. I stumbled out of bed in my boxers, opened the door, and found the final boss of Karens standing there. Fake blonde bob, knockoff blazer, and a rage-filled expression that could curdle milk. "You need to move that boat right now," she shrieked. Before I could even say good morning, behind her was a clipboard thick enough to rival a customs form and a roll of bright orange violation stickers, guaranteed to ruin my weekend. I had no idea this was just the opening shot in a war that would end with her loading boxes into a U-Haul while the whole neighborhood cheered. Comment below what state you're watching from. Apparently, Karen drama is a universal language. Let me back up a bit. My name is Nathan Cole, and I'm a 39-year-old graphic designer who works from home. I moved to Sunset Harbor, Florida about 18 months ago after my divorce, looking for peace and quiet by the water. The place came with a small dock where I keep my fishing boat, nothing fancy, just a little 14-foot, and I painted Lazy Sunday on the side. Every morning, I'd sit on that dock with my coffee, watching the sun come up over the lake. It was paradise. Or at least it was until Hurricane Karen showed up at my door. "Ma'am, I think there's been some confusion," I said, trying to be polite despite being half awake and mostly naked. "That's my boat, on my dock. I've had it there since I moved in." She looked at me like I just told her the earth was flat. "Your dock? Your dock?" She started laughing, but not the good kind, the kind that makes you want to slowly back away. "This is community water, and that boat is in violation of Section 12.3b of the Homeowners Association regulations." He slapped a bright orange sticker right on my poor boat like she was serving a warrant. I looked at this woman, who I later learned was Dana Ellison, and tried to process what was happening. She was taking photos of my boat from every angle, like she was documenting a crime scene, using a clipboard that looked official but seemed homemade. "I'm sorry, but who are you exactly?" I asked. "I'm Dana Ellison, president of the Sunset Harbor Homeowners Association," she announced, puffing up like a peacock. "And you were in serious violation of community standards." The whole thing felt surreal. Here I was, standing in my underwear at dawn, being lectured by someone who clearly had some authority issues, but Dana was just getting started. She pulled out what appeared to be an official violation notice, printed on regular computer paper, but with enough fonts and borders to make it look important. "You have 24 hours to remove this unauthorized watercraft, or you'll face a fine of $500 per day," she declared, as if she was delivering a court order. $500? I repeated, wondering if I was still asleep and this was some kind of stress dream. "The rules are very clear," Dana continued, adjusting her obviously fake jewelry. "No personal watercraft in community areas without proper authorization. This dock may be attached to your property, but the water is shared community space." She said this with the confidence of someone who'd never been wrong about anything in her life. I noticed her car parked in my driveway, an older BMW that had seen better days. "Look," I said, trying to keep things civil, "I think there might be some misunderstanding here. When I bought this place, the dock was part of the property. I have all the paperwork." Dana waved her hand dismissively. "Paperwork can be wrong. I've been living in this community for 3 years, and I know the rules better than anyone. That boat needs to go, period." She took one more photo for good measure, then turned on her heel and marched back to her car. 24 hours, she called over her shoulder. "And don't think about ignoring this. I'll be watching." As I watched her drive away, I couldn't help but notice she was heading toward the smallest house in the development. Something about the whole interaction felt off. The way she'd emphasized being HOA president, the obvious desperation to appear authoritative. I'd dealt with difficult clients in my design work, but this was something else entirely. I went back inside and made coffee, thinking about what had just happened. Part of me wanted to just move the boat to avoid conflict. Life's too short to fight with crazy neighbors, right? But something about Dana's attitude rubbed me the wrong way. The smug certainty, the immediate hostility, the way she'd treated me like a criminal for having a boat at my own dock, and that fine $500 a day, that seemed excessive for any reasonable HOA regulation. I decided to call my ex-wife Rachel. I know that sounds weird, but we'd remained friends after our divorce, and she's a property lawyer. If anyone could explain HOA rules to me, it would be her. "Hey, Rachel," I said when she picked up. "I need some advice about property law. Can you explain HOA rules to me?" There was a pause. "Nathan, what's going on?" she asked, and I could hear the concern in her voice. I told her about my morning encounter with Dana, the violation notice, and the outrageous fine threat. "Bring me your property deed and any HOA documents you got when you bought the place." Rachel said after I finished my story. "I'll look them over this afternoon, but Nathan, something about this doesn't sound right. Most HOAs can't just arbitrarily fine people $500 a day, especially for boats on private docks." As I hung up the phone, I had a feeling this was just the beginning. Something about Dana's behavior suggested this wasn't really about boat regulations. It felt personal. The way she'd looked at my peaceful setup with what seemed like envy mixed with anger. I thought Rachel would just explain some boring property rules. I had no idea she was about to tell me something that would change everything. Rachel came over that afternoon with her lawyer face on, the expression she gets when she's about to destroy someone's argument in court. She spread my property documents across my kitchen table and spent about 10 minutes reading through everything. "Nathan," she said finally, "your dock is completely legal. You own that waterfront." She pointed to the property survey. "See this line? Your property goes right to the water's edge. That dock has been there since the house was built." "So Dana was wrong?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Dana was completely wrong," Rachel confirmed. "Not only that, but I don't see any record of her being officially elected as HOA president. From what I can tell, she just appointed herself." This was getting interesting. Rachel gathered up the papers and looked at me seriously. "Nathan, I think you're dealing with someone who's on a power trip. Be careful." The next morning, I was enjoying my coffee on the dock when I saw an elderly woman walking toward me. "You must be Nathan," she said with a warm smile. "I'm Evelyn Brooks. I live in the blue house down the street. I wanted to apologize for yesterday morning." I invited her to sit down, curious about what she meant. "Apologize for what?" I asked. Evelyn settled into the chair next to mine and sighed. "For Dana Ellison. She's been terrorizing this neighborhood for months." Evelyn told me stories that made my blood boil. Dana had called code enforcement on families for children's chalk art and tried to ban residents from normal activities in their own yards. "The woman is obsessed with control," Evelyn explained. "Ever since her divorce, she's been taking out her frustrations on anyone who looks happy. I have a feeling she targeted you because you seem so peaceful and content. That probably drives her crazy." That evening, I found a notice taped to my front door. "Emergency HOA meeting tonight at 7 p.m., Community Center, urgent violations to discuss." I could practically feel Dana's excitement radiating from the paper. Well, if she wanted a meeting, I'd give her a meeting. I gathered up all my property documents and headed over to the community center. The scene that greeted me was something out of a comedy sketch. Dana had set up a projector for what appeared to be a PowerPoint presentation and had positioned herself at the front of the room like she was running a corporate board meeting. She was wearing a different outfit tonight, and she had a wooden gavel that looked like it came from a craft store. About 15 residents had shown up, most looking confused about why they were there. Dana called the meeting to order and launched into her presentation. "We're here tonight to address serious violations of community standards," she announced dramatically. "As your HOA president, it's my duty to maintain property values and ensure everyone follows the rules." I noticed several people exchanging glances. Apparently others were also questioning her authority. She had actually made a slide with a photo of my boat, complete with a red circle and an X mark. When she finished her presentation, I stood up. "I'd like to respond to these allegations," I said calmly. I walked to the front and spread my property deed on the table where everyone could see it. "This is my property survey," I explained to the room. "As you can see, my property line extends to the water's edge. The dock in question is on my private property, not in any community area." I watched Dana's face go through several color changes as people leaned forward to examine the documents. "Furthermore," I continued, "I have all the necessary permits for the dock." Dana studied the documents, her face getting redder by the minute. I could see the wheels turning as she realized her power play was falling apart. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. "Well," she said, her voice slightly higher than before, "even if the dock is technically on your property, boats in the community still require proper authorization." The room was getting restless. People were clearly getting tired of Dana's theatrics. "Emergency rule change," Dana announced suddenly. "All boats in Sunset Harbor must pay a monthly dock maintenance fee of $2,000. The silence that followed was deafening. $2,000, several people said at once. "Where does it say you can charge that?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "I have full authority as HOA president," Dana declared, but her voice was cracking now. That's when Evelyn spoke up. "Since when?" "I don't remember voting for you." Other residents started murmuring agreement. "What board?" asked Mr. Patterson from down the street. Dana's carefully constructed authority was crumbling in real time. I was elected by the board, she insisted, but everyone could see she was making it up. The meeting devolved into chaos as residents started questioning everything Dana had told them. People were pulling out their phones to record her meltdown, and Dana seemed to realize she'd overplayed her hand. "This meeting is adjourned," she announced, grabbing her materials and rushing toward the exit. As people filed out, several neighbors came up to thank me for standing up to Dana. "Someone needed to call her out," said Mrs. Chen. Evo Lin patted my shoulder. "You've got backbone, Nathan. Dana doesn't know what to do with people who fight back." As I walked home, I felt satisfied but also wary. Dana had been publicly humiliated tonight, and something told me she wasn't going to take that lying down. That night, I started digging into community records. What I found made my blood run cold. I spent the next morning doing what any reasonable person would do after being harassed by a fake HOA president. I researched everything I could about Sunset Harbor's actual governance structure. What I found was fascinating and infuriating in equal measure. According to the county records, there was no official HOA for Sunset Harbor. Dana Ellison had literally appointed herself president of an organization that didn't exist. But that wasn't the most interesting part. As I dug deeper into property records, I discovered that Dana didn't even own her house. She was renting the smallest unit in the development. Suddenly, her desperate need to control everything made more sense. She was the least established resident in the community, trying to create authority where none existed. Armed with this information, I decided to do some field research. Over the next few days, I documented Dana's own violations of the community standards she claimed to enforce. She consistently parked in the fire lane, had loud phone arguments early in the morning, and had added concrete borders to her garden without any permits. Evelyn stopped by on Thursday afternoon with some neighborhood gossip. "You should know that Dana's been calling everyone, trying to build support for her crusade against you," she said, "but it's not going well. Most people are getting tired of her act." Evelyn leaned forward conspiratorially. "Also, I may have mentioned to a few people that you have actual legal documentation and she doesn't." That afternoon, I got my first taste of Dana's escalation tactics. She called the county code enforcement office and filed a complaint about my illegal dock structure. The inspector called me directly to schedule an appointment. "I'll be out tomorrow morning around 10, he said. "Probably just a routine check, but I have to follow up on all complaints." I thanked him and immediately called Rachel to give her a heads up. Friday morning arrived with perfect Florida weather. I was sitting on my dock with my coffee when the code enforcement truck pulled up. The inspector, a friendly guy named Mike Rodriguez, walked over with his clipboard and measuring tape. "You must be Nathan," he said. "I'm here about a complaint regarding your dock." I handed him all my permits and documentation, which he reviewed carefully. "Everything looks good here," Mike said after about 15 minutes. "Dock was built to code, properly permitted, no violations." That's when I noticed Dana lurking by her house, clearly waiting for some kind of dramatic confrontation. "Actually," Mike continued, "I noticed some unpermitted concrete work in that garden over there. Is that on your property?" I followed his gaze to Dana's garden borders. "No, that's my neighbor's place," I replied. What happened next was better than any comedy show. Mike walked over to examine Dana's concrete work, while she emerged from her house looking flustered. "Ma'am, I need to ask you about these concrete borders," Mike said professionally. "Do you have permits for this hardscaping?" Dana's expression went from confident to confused to panicked. "Permits? Ma'am, this appears to be on your rental property and county code requires permits for permanent concrete installations," Mike explained patiently. He started writing on his clipboard while Dana's voice got higher and more desperate. "But I'm the one who called you. You're supposed to be citing him." She pointed at me like I was some kind of criminal mastermind. I tried my best not to smile as I sipped my coffee from the dock, but it was difficult. Mike finished writing and handed Dana a citation. "Ma'am, I'm issuing a violation notice for unpermitted hardscaping. You have 30 days to either obtain proper permits or remove the concrete work. The fine is $850. Dana's face went through several shades of red before settling on purple. "This is ridiculous. I'm the HOA president," she protested. "Ma'am, that doesn't override county building codes," Mike replied with professional patience. He walked back over to me and shook my hand. "Your dock is completely legal, Mr. Cole. Have a good day." As his truck pulled away, I could see neighbors peering out their windows, some of them recording Dana's meltdown. Dana stormed over to my dock, furious. "This is your fault," she screamed. "You turned them against me." I stood up slowly, maintaining my calm demeanor. "Dana, I didn't turn anyone against you. I simply showed the inspector my legal documentation when he asked for it. If your concrete work doesn't have permits, that's between you and the county." "You think you're so smart," she hissed, "but I know people. I have connections. This isn't over." She turned and marched back to her house, slamming the door so hard I was surprised the frame didn't crack. Within an hour, my phone started buzzing with texts from neighbors who had witnessed the scene. Evelyn sent me a particularly entertaining message. "Just watch the best reality TV show ever, no subscription required." That evening, I decided it was time to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I called Rachel and asked her to meet me for dinner. "I think I need to understand exactly what I inherited when I bought this place," I told her. "Something about this whole situation doesn't feel right. Dana's acting like someone who has something to lose, but she's just a renter. What am I missing?" Rachel was quiet for a long moment after I finished explaining the week's events. "Nathan," she said slowly, "I think it's time we had a serious conversation about your grandfather's estate. When I handled your inheritance paperwork, there were some aspects I didn't think were important at the time." She paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "Can you come to my office tomorrow? There are some documents I think you need to see." Rachel went quiet for a long moment. Then she said 5 words that changed everything. "Nathan, we need to talk." Saturday morning found me sitting in Rachel's law office, surrounded by manila folders and legal documents that apparently contained surprises about my own life. "Nathan," Rachel began, spreading papers across her conference table, "when your grandfather died and left you the house, you asked me to handle the simple stuff, remember? Transfer the deed, pay the taxes, make sure everything was legal." I nodded, remembering how overwhelmed I'd been with grief and divorce proceedings at the same time. "Well, the house was simple," Rachel continued, "but your grandfather's estate was anything but simple." She pulled out what looked like an old survey map. "Your grandfather bought this entire area back when it was farmland in the 80s. I stared at the map, trying to process what she was showing me. "What do you mean entire area?" Rachel pointed to different sections of the survey. "I mean the whole lake and the land under most of these houses." "That's impossible," I said, though the evidence was right there in front of me. Rachel pulled out another document, a deed that looked official and intimidating. "Nathan," she said gently, "you own Sunset Harbor Lake, the whole thing. 180 acres of water, plus the land under 18 of the 23 houses in your development." The words hit me like a physical blow. I owned the lake, the entire lake where Dana had been threatening to ban me? "But I would have known that, right?" I asked, feeling stupid even as the words left my mouth. Rachel laughed, but not unkindly. "Nathan, you specifically told me you didn't want to deal with the complicated stuff. You were going through your divorce, you were grieving, and you just wanted the house transferred so you could move on. I handled all the corporate entities separately." She showed me how my grandfather had set everything up. He'd bought the land cheap, developed it slowly, selling houses while keeping ownership of the lake and key infrastructure. "Most of the residents pay annual fees for lake access and utilities," Rachel explained simply. "They don't own their lots outright. They have long-term leases with your family's companies." As this information sank in, I started understanding Dana's behavior in a completely different light. "So when she said the lake was community property," I began. "She was completely wrong," Rachel finished. "The lake is private property, your private property. She has no authority over it whatsoever." I sat back in my chair, staring at the documents that had just turned my understanding upside down. "So, I'm not just some guy with a fishing boat," I said slowly. "I'm the guy who owns the body of water she's trying to ban me from." The irony was almost too perfect. Dana had spent weeks trying to establish fake authority over community property, when the real authority belonged to the quiet guy in flip-flops she'd been harassing. "Does this mean I can actually ban her from the lake?" I asked. "Technically, yes," Rachel replied, "though I'd recommend being more diplomatic than that." As I drove home from Rachel's office, my head was spinning. Every time I'd sat on my dock, sipping coffee and watching the sunrise, I'd been enjoying my own private lake. Every time Dana had threatened to fine me for using community water, she'd been threatening the actual owner. But my peaceful reflection was interrupted by chaos in my neighborhood. As I pulled into my driveway, I could see a small crowd gathered around the community center. Dana's voice was carrying across the water, high-pitched and agitated. I walked over to see what was happening and found her in the middle of what appeared to be an impromptu rally. "We need to take decisive action," Dana was saying to the gathered residents. "Nathan Cole has shown complete disrespect for our community standards, and we cannot let that stand." I watched from the edge of the crowd as Dana worked herself into a frenzy. "He thinks he can just ignore our rules because he has some lawyer friend," she continued. "Well, I have news for him. This is our community, and we decide who belongs here." Several residents looked uncomfortable with her rhetoric, but a few were nodding along. It was clear Dana had spent the past few days building support among people who didn't know the real story. "I motion for an immediate vote," Dana announced. "All in favor of permanently banning Nathan Cole from community lake access, say aye." To my surprise, 3 people actually said aye, though I noticed they were all people who lived far from the lake and probably had no idea what was really going on. "All opposed?" Dana asked, quickly, clearly hoping to rush through the process. Evelyn's voice rang out, clearly. "This is ridiculous. You can't just ban someone because you don't like them." "The motion passes," Dana declared triumphantly, though her mouth was questionable at best. "Nathan Cole is hereby banned from all community amenities, effective immediately. If he violates this ban, he'll be subject to trespassing charges." She was practically glowing with satisfaction as she made this announcement, completely unaware that she'd just banned the actual property owner from his own lake. As the crowd dispersed, Evelyn came over to me. "I'm sorry about that circus," she said. "Dana only invited her supporters, and she rushed the vote before anyone could object properly. It's not legitimate, and everyone knows it." I thanked her for speaking up, but honestly, I wasn't upset. If anything, I was fascinated by how far Dana was willing to go in her delusion of authority. That night, I sat on my dock with the property documents Rachel had given me, looking out over my lake under the stars. For the first time in my life, I understood what people meant when they talked about generational wealth. My grandfather hadn't just left me a house, he'd left me a legacy. And Dana Ellison had no idea what she'd just stepped into. As I sat there holding the deed to the entire lake, I realized Dana had no idea who she'd just banned from his own property. The next morning, I called Rachel to update her on Dana's latest power play. "She banned you from the lake?" Rachel said, and I could hear her trying not to laugh. "Nathan, she just banned the legal owner of the lake from accessing his own property. Do you understand how legally absurd that is?" I told her I was starting to get the picture. "What's our next move?" I asked. "We're going to let her dig her hole a little deeper," Rachel replied. "Then we're going to show everyone exactly who owns what around here." Dana wasted no time implementing her ban. By Monday morning, she had installed laminated signs around the lake that read, "Public community water, no trespassing, violators will be prosecuted." The signs were clearly homemade but mounted on metal stakes like official notices. She'd also hired Tyler Patterson, a 19-year-old from down the street, as lake security for $25 an hour. Tuesday morning brought the most surreal confrontation yet. I was sitting on my dock enjoying my coffee when Tyler paddled toward me in a kayak, looking extremely uncomfortable. Sir?" he called out. "Mrs. Ellison says you can't be here?" I could see Dana positioned on the shore with her phone, filming the entire encounter. "Hey, Tyler," I said calmly, "what's going on?" The kid looked mortified as he explained that Dana had hired him as security. She said, "You're prohibited from the water and I have to ask you to leave." What happened next was the most absurd moment of the entire ordeal. As I started packing up my fishing gear, Dana began live streaming the event. "This is what happens when people think they're above community standards," she announced to her small audience. "Watch as we restore order to Sunset Harbor." She was practically bouncing with excitement, completely oblivious to the fact that she was documenting her harassment of the property owner. "Of course," I replied to Tyler, "just following community rules." I started loading my boat, while Dana continued her commentary from shore. "Make sure you get him leaving," she called out. Tyler paddled alongside me as I moved toward the boat ramp. "Sorry, man," he whispered. "She's paying me and I need gas money, but this is really weird." The entire neighborhood had turned out to watch Dana's production. Residents lined the shore with their phones out, some recording, others just watching in amazement. As I loaded my boat onto its trailer, Dana delivered what she clearly thought was a triumphant speech. "Let this be a lesson to everyone," she declared, still filming. "No one is above our community standards. This is what real leadership looks like." Over the next few days, Dana ramped up her security operations to increasingly ridiculous levels. She installed a folding chair by the lake for surveillance and created official-looking violation tickets using carbon paper. She even started charging other residents guest fees when their family members wanted to visit the lake area. The breaking point came Friday evening when Tyler stopped by my house looking troubled. "Mr. Cole," he said quietly, "I wanted to give you a heads up. Mrs. Ellison is planning something big for this weekend. She's talking about making an example, and I don't think it's going to be good." Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather, and I decided to take my boat out one last time before revealing my ownership. As I was loading my fishing gear, I could see Dana setting up what appeared to be a command center on the shore. She had Tyler and 2 other teenagers with her now, all wearing matching t-shirts that said Lake Patrol. I launched my boat and headed to my favorite fishing spot. The water was glass smooth, perfect for a peaceful morning. But within minutes, Dana's security team was mobilizing. The 3 teenagers paddled out in kayaks, while Dana coordinated from shore with a walkie-talkie system. "Sir, you need to leave the water immediately," Tyler called out when they reached me. "You're in violation of community regulations, and Mrs. Ellison says she's calling the police if you don't comply." I looked around at the 3 teenagers, all looking deeply uncomfortable with their roles. "Just doing your jobs, right?" I said, and they all nodded gratefully. As I drove home with my boat in tow, I could see neighbors talking in small groups, clearly discussing what they'd just witnessed. Several people waved at me sympathetically, and Evelyn gave me a thumbs up from her garden. Dana had overplayed her hand so dramatically that even her few remaining supporters were starting to question her methods. That evening, I texted Rachel, "Tomorrow, it's time." Her response came back immediately, "I'll bring the popcorn. This is going to be good." Dana had just publicly humiliated the owner of everything she thought she controlled. She had no idea what was coming. Sunday evening arrived with the kind of dramatic sunset that seemed perfectly timed for what was about to unfold. Dana had called another emergency community meeting to make Nathan's ban permanent and establish new security protocols. I arrived at the community center with Rachel, both of us carrying folders full of documents that would change everything. The room was packed, word had spread about Dana's increasingly erratic behavior, and people wanted to see what would happen next. Dana had outdone herself with the theatrical setup. She'd created a presentation and positioned herself at the front of the room like she was delivering a corporate announcement. She was wearing what appeared to be her best outfit, complete with obviously fake jewelry that caught the light every time she moved. Her confidence was absolute. She truly believed she was about to cement her authority once and for all. "We're here tonight to address a serious threat to our community," Dana began, clicking to her first slide, which featured a photo of me fishing with a red circle and slash mark over it. "Nathan Cole has shown complete disrespect for our established rules and democratic decisions. Tonight, we make his ban permanent and establish clear consequences for anyone who thinks they're above community standards." She clicked through several slides detailing her security improvements and enforcement protocols, each one more ridiculous than the last. She had actually created an organizational chart showing herself as Community Standards Director, with various residents assigned roles in her imaginary security force. The whole presentation was so delusional that several people in the audience were exchanging concerned glances. "Before we vote," Dana announced dramatically, "I want everyone to understand the stakes. If we let people like Nathan ignore our rules, property values will plummet. Our community will become lawless. We must take a stand." She was building to what she clearly thought would be a rousing climax when I stood up. "Excuse me," I said calmly, "but before we vote on anything, I should probably mention something." Dana's face immediately flushed red. "You're banned from speaking here," she snapped. "Security, please escort this trespasser out." She looked around the room expectantly, but her security team consisted of 3 teenagers who were suddenly very interested in their phones. I walked to the front of the room and unfolded a large document on the table where everyone could see it. "This is my property deed," I said simply. The room fell completely silent as people leaned forward to see what I was showing them. "According to this legal document, I own Sunset Harbor Lake, the whole thing, 180 acres of water." The silence stretched for several seconds before Dana found her voice. "That's ridiculous," she shrieked. "This is community property. You can't just claim to own a lake." But even as she said it, I could see doubt creeping into her expression. Rachel stepped forward and placed additional documents on the table. "These are the property records going back to the 80s, she explained professionally. "Nathan's grandfather purchased the entire watershed and left it to Nathan in his will." "You're lying," Dana screamed, but her voice was getting higher and more desperate. "Show me proof." So I did. I spread out the original survey maps, the development plans, and finally, the deed that showed my ownership of not just the lake, but the land under 18 of the 23 houses in Sunset Harbor. The room erupted into chaos. Residents were pulling out their phones to record, others were demanding to see the documents for themselves, and a few people were already heading for the exits. "What does this mean for our houses?" someone called out. "Are we all trespassers now?" asked another voice. Dana was frantically shuffling through the papers, her face cycling through several shades of red as the reality became undeniable. "Even if this is true," Dana said, her voice cracking, "you can't just kick people out. There are laws. You have responsibilities." She was grasping at straws now, trying to maintain some semblance of authority, even as her entire world collapsed. "You hid this information. This is fraud. You deliberately deceived the community." "Actually," I replied calmly, "I had no idea I owned the lake until this week. I inherited my grandfather's estate without fully understanding what it included, but now that I do know, I think we need to clarify a few things." I looked around the room at faces that ranged from shocked to amused to concerned. First, nobody's getting kicked out. Most of you have legal lease agreements that I intend to honor. Second, I'm not interested in being a tyrant landlord. But I wasn't finished. I walked outside and returned with a large sign that I'd had made that afternoon. "Pidley Property, Sunset Harbor Lake, owner Nathan Cole," read the professionally printed sign. I calmly installed it where Dana had placed her homemade community water signs. The symbolism was perfect. Official authority replacing fake authority. "However," I continued, looking directly at Dana, "I do think we need some changes around here, starting with honest leadership." Dana's composure finally cracked completely. "This isn't fair," she wailed. "I've worked so hard to maintain standards. I've sacrificed everything for this community." Several residents actually laughed at this, given that she'd been terrorizing them for months. "Dana," I said, not unkindly, "you don't own anything here. You're renting the smallest house in the development, you appointed yourself to a position that doesn't exist, and you've been harassing people based on completely fictional authority. That needs to stop." The truth of it hit her like a physical blow. She looked around the room desperately, seeking support, but found only embarrassed faces and recording phones. "I'm giving everyone 48 hours to hold a real election for community leadership," I announced to the room, "with all residents voting, not just hand-picked supporters. I want someone reasonable in charge who actually represents the community's interests." I looked at Dana one more time. "And I want someone who understands the difference between community service and personal power trips." Dana gathered her materials with shaking hands, her outfit suddenly looking even more pathetic under the community center's lights. "This isn't over," she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. Everyone in the room could see that it was very much over. As she headed for the exit, Tyler Patterson actually started a slow clap that several other residents joined. After Dana left, the meeting continued for another hour, with residents asking practical questions about property rights and community governance. The mood was actually quite positive. People seemed relieved to finally have clarity and to be free from Dana's arbitrary rule-making. As I packed up my documents, Evelyn approached me with a smile. "Nathan," she said, "I think you handled that perfectly. Firm but fair." She paused thoughtfully. "Though I have a feeling Dana isn't done. When someone's entire identity crumbles like that, they don't usually go quietly." Monday morning brought an unusual quiet to Sunset Harbor. Dana's security patrols had stopped, her homemade signs had been removed, and for the first time in months, residents could enjoy the lake without fear of harassment. But I knew Dana well enough to suspect she wasn't going down without a fight. Sure enough, around 10 a.m., I saw her car pull out of her driveway and head toward town with obvious determination. Dana had driven straight to a strip mall law office sandwiched between a nail salon and a tax preparation service. The lawyer, Jerry Hoffman, listened patiently as Dana explained her situation and presented her folder of homemade HOA documents. After 15 minutes of review, Jerry delivered the news she didn't want to hear. "Ma'am, this gentleman legally owns the lake. The documentation appears legitimate and dates back 40 years. Your Homeowners Association appears to be informal." Dana pressed him desperately, insisting there had to be some loophole, some way to challenge my ownership. But Jerry explained that being president of a non-existent organization didn't override property law, and that challenging legitimate property deeds from 40 years ago would cost more money than she could possibly afford. The consultation cost her $200, for very bad news. Meanwhile, the community was organizing itself properly for the first time. Evelyn Brooks had stepped up to coordinate a legitimate election, and residents were excited about fair representation. That evening, we held the first honest community meeting Sunset Harbor had seen in years. 22 of the 23 residents showed up, everyone except Dana, who was apparently too humiliated to face her neighbors. The vote was swift and decisive. Dana was removed from her self-appointed position by a margin of 21-1. Evelyn was elected as interim community coordinator with unanimous support, and we established simple, reasonable guidelines for community governance. No more arbitrary fines, no more harassment, no more fake authority. Just neighbors working together to maintain a pleasant place to live. But Dana wasn't ready to accept defeat. On Tuesday afternoon, she appeared at my front door looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually perfect appearance was disheveled, and her eyes darted around desperately. "Nathan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "we need to talk." I invited her in, curious to see what her final play would be. She tried several approaches in rapid succession. First bargaining, "What if I help you manage the community? I could be your property manager. I know everyone's business, their habits, their problems. You need someone like me." Then pleading, "I've put everything into this place. It's all I have left after my divorce. Please don't make me start over again." Finally, threats. "You can't just kick me out. I'll contact the media. I'll tell them how you deceived an entire community. I'll sue for wrongful eviction." I listened to her entire emotional cycle before responding calmly. "Dana, you have 30 days to find new housing arrangements. I'm not evicting you out of spite. I'm ending the lease where the tenant has been harassing other residents and the landlord." The finality seemed to hit her all at once. She broke down crying, but even in her tears there was still entitlement. "This isn't fair," she sobbed. "I was just trying to maintain standards." "No," I replied firmly. "You were trying to control people because it made you feel important. There's a difference." She left that afternoon looking more defeated than I'd ever seen anyone. True to my word, I didn't evict any other residents. Instead, I worked with Rachel to create fair lease agreements that gave people security while maintaining reasonable community standards. I eliminated all of Dana's arbitrary rules and established simple guidelines focused on actual quality of life issues. No more harassment about flowers, children's art, or normal neighborhood activities. The transformation was remarkable. Within a month, Sunset Harbor had become the kind of community people actually wanted to live in. Property values increased, there was a waiting list of people hoping to move in, and residents were genuinely happy to be there. We organized monthly community barbecues by the lake and established a sensible neighborhood watch program. The final scene of Dana's Sunset Harbor story played out on a Thursday morning in late August. I was having my morning coffee on the dock when I heard the distinctive rumble of a moving truck. Looking toward Dana's house, I could see her directing movers as they loaded her belongings into a beat-up U-Haul. Several neighbors had gathered to watch, though whether out of sympathy or satisfaction was hard to tell. As the truck pulled away, Dana took one last look around the community she'd tried so hard to control. Our eyes met across the water, and for just a moment, I saw not the petty tyrant who had made everyone's life miserable, but a broken woman who had lost everything she thought mattered. She stood there for a long moment, probably realizing that all her schemes and power plays had led to this inevitable end. Then she got in her car and drove away, leaving Sunset Harbor peaceful for the first time in months. Several neighbors had watched the entire departure, and I noticed a few people actually waved goodbye, not out of meanness, but perhaps with a sense of closure for the whole bizarre chapter of community life. That evening, as I sat on my dock watching another spectacular sunset over my lake, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. 6 months ago, I'd been a simple graphic designer who just wanted to fish in peace. Now, I was a property owner who had accidentally become the protector of a small community. The whole experience had taught me something important about the difference between real authority and fake power. Dana had spent months trying to create authority through intimidation and fake credentials, but real authority comes from actually having responsibility and using it wisely. She'd been so focused on controlling others that she'd forgotten the most basic rule of leadership. You have to actually serve the people you're supposed to lead. As the stars came out over Sunset Harbor Lake, I thought about my grandfather and the legacy he'd left me. He'd built something that would last, something that could provide homes and happiness for families for generations. Dana had tried to tear that down with her petty tyranny, but in the end, the truth had won out. Sometimes the best revenge isn't fighting back harder, it's just showing people who they decided to mess with. And sometimes, when you inherit something bigger than you expected, the best thing you can do is use that power to make life better for everyone around you. That's exactly what I plan to do.
QA stories where reality feels like fiction and fiction wishes it was this juicy. Hit that like before the next bombshell drops.